have to start the video off like this. Welcome to the Jay Revardo Show.
There was another election on Tuesday. It was in Minnesota, and the socialist over in Minnesota, Peggy Flanagan.
She's not a socialist.
Okay, the radical lunatic Peggy Flanagan decides she won over the moderate Craig. I mean, that did happen.
On CNN, Democrats are having a debate they might not be able to avoid much longer. What exactly is the party becoming? After the latest primaries, Scott Jennings, Bakari Sellers, and the rest of the panel go head-to-head over Democratic Socialism, electability, and whether the Democratic Party has actually moved past some of their most controversial positions or simply changed the language. I think Bakari sums it up in about 3 words. Don't be weird. Roll it.
The larger message for Democrats is like, don't be weird. That simply like on.
So you're telling me he's going to tell a dog not to bark, a bird not to fly, and a TV not to be inanimate? It's going to be really hard for them to accomplish not being weird, Bakari. Scott Jennings says some of these candidates have years of statements the Republicans can put right back in front of voters. And he has examples. Roll it.
For the days of Todd Aiken. I can remember the days of Catherine O'Donnell saying, I am not a witch. Right. And I know who Ken Paxton is. Like, I've seen the corruption surrounding Ken Paxton. We cannot run candidates who fundamentally are not ready.
I mean, the Nazi tattoo alleged rapist guy, that was a bad idea.
One second.
So, correct. And we repudiated
But eventually,
One second. Bakari.
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to interrupt. That sounds fine, I think. But the fact of the matter is that she was running against someone who literally just came in 3 weeks ago and running against a divided group of people. And so, you know, this was not a very concerted effort to take her down. And so what you're seeing here is, I think, a very divided Democratic Party.
No, I mean, you want it to be that because that's a better story. What you're seeing is the same thing we've seen over and over again, which is fundamentally DSA candidates do not do well in rural communities. They do not do well with black voters, point blank, period. They have not been able to win in the South. They actually had an election, and Abdul is not necessarily a DSA candidate.
You know, he's got Thanksgiving problems. 2019. Just a reminder, this Thanksgiving, this country was built on the systematic annihilation of indigenous peoples whose ancestors suffer some of the highest rates of homelessness, joblessness, and mortality. We owe so much more than thanks. Time for reparations. So the problem with
facts.
Not facts. Okay, and that's Scott's argument. You can change what you're campaigning on today. You can change the language. You can even distance yourself from an old position. But in politics, your opponent is going to pull those statements right back up and ask voters, did the candidate actually change? Or did the messaging change? Now, Bakari brings up another problem for the DSA movement that might be even bigger than old tweets. Who can they actually win over? Bro,
That's
actually a true sentence.
The problem with don't be weird is that all these socialist or socialist adjacent or communist adjacent or whatever candidates all spent a fair number of years tweeting weird things that put them in the same bucket as Hong. You said he's a political animal. He's got a lot of the same beliefs. He's got a lot of the same beliefs.
He's more nuanced. But I will tell you this, Scott. He has work to do. Then when you want to, if we want to say, oh my God, DSA is making inroads because of what happened in Wisconsin with the election, you have to realize that over 50% of voters in Michigan, they didn't vote for Abdullah Saeed.
Well, so Bakari, I think it's interesting. You're talking a lot about where black voters are going, and we're seeing Abdullah Saeed needs to make more of an effort for that because Mike Rogers is making a play for more moderate voters. And I kind of reject your notion that you think essentially more establishment Democrats are going to continue to lead the party. That's simply not true, especially because we're seeing the Democratic Party is basically absorbing all of the far left ideas that the DSA is putting forward. And so even the so-called moderate who won isn't really moderate. He doesn't want to work with federal law enforcement, ICE. He wants an open border. He wants all of these very far left things. So he's just not quite as crazy because he doesn't want to cancel Thanksgiving. I think that's the question. Even if he isn't DSA, they're still absorbing far left ideas. And I think that's going to repel.
Let's actually say if we want to make sure that everybody has access to quality health care or first-class education, or we want to take Madani approaches to affordability, things that matter to people,
like rent hitting a new all-time high.
Then that's something. That's something that people actually care about. I'm talking about the fact is people aren't necessarily talking about defunding the police. If you want to talk about ICE, we'll talk about that a little later. But to say
lots of people are talking about defunding them.
That's Listen, come on, Bakari. Yes, I just now received the phone call. What is wrong? What is wrong with Bakari? Huh? You don't know? You have no idea what's wrong with him? Okay. All right. Well, I personally think that he's lying. No one. No. I think that the whole entire Democrat Party wants to abolish everything that's law enforcement. That's what I personally think. Yeah. That was a skit.
She did have candidate quality issues. And so we can argue about the DSA and whether it's making more of an impact and whether that Democratic voters want candidates like that in rural or urban areas. But I will say, though, that I think that voters in Wisconsin, these Democratic primary voters, recognize the threat that is Tom Tiffany and electing him as governor. Because if we have a disputed presidential election in 2028, it's going to be governors like him who are making decisions about that election. And so it is important that we're not putting up an election denier to fill that governor's
There
seat.
was another election on Tuesday. It was in Minnesota. And the socialist over in Minnesota, Peggy Flanagan.
She's not a socialist.
Okay. The radical lunatic Peggy Flanagan decides she won.
This speaks to the conflation that's happening, that you hear that everyone is now a socialist when we're talking about Democrats. But actually, Lydia, I want to ask you something. Because if you look right now at Mayor Mamdani, who is the most famous Democratic Socialist, his approval rating is going up, which is unprecedented. He is trying to show that Democratic Socialism is actually something that can work. How do you explain that?
Look, it's a good question. I think he was a very skilled marketer, which is why he got into the mayoral office in the first place. And he's continuing to do that. He's very good at the photo ops. But if you look at the numbers, those are telling a completely different story. Rents are at a new all-time high. So I think eventually the data and the reality of the policies he's implementing are going to catch up with him.
I do think, though, that there are New Yorkers who are happy with him, not because he's a member of the Democratic Socialist Party. They're happy with him because he was talking about affordability and addressing their top priorities. They're happy with him because he's following through on campaign promises. You look at filling potholes or fixing drinking fountains. These are things that New Yorkers care about.
He fixed one drinking fountain, and it's because somebody tagged him on Instagram to do that. A functioning government doesn't need somebody to be tagged on Instagram to fix something.
I talk to a lot of young Democrats and young progressives, and they all say the exact same thing. They say that they're dissatisfied with the leadership of the Democratic Party because the grievances that underpinned those tweets and statements in 2020 have not been addressed by Democratic leaders. So people who speak to those grievances will win inside the Democratic Party, and people who show results on those grievances.
It's also generational, and we're seeing
it is generational.
The Democrat Party is submerged with minorities due to the fact that they hand out free this, free that, and promise impossible things so they can maintain their voter base. It has nothing to do with anything. It's because their mother and their grandmother, their father and their grandfather voted for the Democrat Party. It's traditional and it's generational, but that's a generational curse. But I think we're starting to wake up. Bakari's argument is essentially win elections and don't nominate a candidate who can't build a coalition behind their ideological base. Scott's argument is that the Republicans have years of controversial statements that they can use to define these candidates. And then there's another argument here. Even when DSA candidates don't win, are some of their ideas moving deeper inside of the Democrat Party? That's the question. Are we actually watching the Democratic Party move to Democratic Socialism? Or are Republicans taking the party's most progressive candidates and using them to define a Democratic Party that's still much broader than that? And when November gets here, what matters more? Ideology or electability? I want to know what you think. Let me know in the comment section down below. And until next time, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so we can keep bringing you debates like this on the Jay Revardo Show.